Hey, everyone joining in. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Still have a few folks trickling through, so let's give it another minute or so and we'll get started. Okay, looks like we got a good attendee list here, so we'll get going. Hey, everyone. Again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for everyone joining in from different parts of the world here. This is JW, go-to-market manager with Entytle. Have a good little event put together for you guys today. Very excited about the presentation here. So moving forward to some rules of the road. Please use the Q&A area for questions for our speaker. You can find that button at the bottom of your screen along with the other buttons on your Zoom bar. There's also a chat button you can use to raise any technical issues during the event. The recording for this and the deck will be sent out to you after the event. Now, going forward, let me introduce our speaker of the day, Vivek Joshi. Vivek is the CEO and founder of Entytle, with decades of experience working on both sides of the industrial equation. He is passionate about all things installed base and simplifying installed base workflows to give customer-facing OEM teams an opportunity to do more with less. He's also the founder of the Industry Next community, which is designed to help industrial leaders share and learn from each other. With that, Vivek, over to you.
JW, thank you very much for the introduction. Good to see some familiar faces in the attendee list. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to you from wherever you guys are calling in from. So, I'm excited about this particular session, and it's a little different from everything we've done recently. We talked about the readiness to change in the aftermarket, the maturity model, and so on and so forth. And I want to preface this by some of the things that I want to make sure that I get my point of view across in terms of why I think this is an important topic. First and foremost, everybody has a particular point of view on why they built this business and why they built their company and so on and so forth. And for me, the real inspiration and the idea really came from understanding and recognition that the install base that all of us manufacturers had, and by the way, for many of you who've met me before know that I've worked at large and small manufacturers my entire life until I started Entytle. The recognition I had was the installed base held enormous amounts of value, latent value, like I used to call it. And those companies that were able to harness and extract the value are the ones that benefited from it. And I thought there was almost like a straight line correlation between the value of the installed base, how people captured it, and the value of the business. And we've seen that time and time again in public markets where people find ways to capture their revenue stream and value stream and get much better valuations out of it. So that has been the point of view that's really informed the company all the way from the beginning. And that's important to note because as we started getting into all the different activities that companies do around an installed base, what became clear to us is that at some point, much like there's this whole vision of autonomous vehicles in the consumer world today, I think there really is a vision that there's a need for what I call an autonomous aftermarket in the world you and I live in. And what I mean by that is the pressures that every one of you face today in the form of talent shortages, retirements, the profit pressures, all the different things going on, just made me believe that fundamentally, if there's a way for you as a manufacturer to just let aftermarket happen and not have to have human intervention and human processes and so on and so forth in the middle of it, that would be just fantastic. And so the vision that's guiding us now is the whole notion of autonomous aftermarket, which means everything we do is all about automation. It's all about making sure the workflows that you have are simple, smart, efficient, and so on and so forth, right? So that's kind of how we think about the point of view leading to a vision, to our mission for the company. And I always say that in the beginning because it's an important way to set the framework, to set the context for where we come from in terms of this process out here. So at the end of today's session, if there's anything I want you to take away from the next 30 minutes or so, is really simple, right? It is fundamentally all about transformation. I've seen this time and time again, the companies that I ran prior to Entytle, as well as what I see with our customers today. Getting this is a big mindset change and is a transformation. Whether you believe it or not, there's a big change management process that needs to happen. And what we've seen is that there's a big gap, and most companies just are simply not ready for this thing. And we've seen costly missteps in terms of people, in terms of technology investments, and so on and so forth, that can really hinder and hurt this change that needs to happen. And then we started thinking about it. Okay, so what's common about the companies that succeed? What's common about the companies that don't succeed? And we recognize that there is some aspect of a maturity process, maturity curve, if you may, that we thought is a good framework to help guide these changes and transformation. So that's kind of what we put together out here. And what you see in the next 10, 15 minutes is really about this notion of the transformation and the maturity model and how you can harness it for your own company's benefit, right? So that's kind of where we are. So before I get going right now, it'll be great to just have a poll question. So DJ, if you don't mind triggering the poll on this particular question, I'd love to understand where you guys are in this journey of reactive versus proactive. It'll be great to just understand the point of view, if you don't mind. I'll stay silent for maybe 30 seconds to see where you guys answer this. It'll be great to get a few answers to this. We'll trigger the poll, right, DJ?
Yes, we will, Vivek.
Okay, all right.
Just wait a couple of seconds.
Need a couple more answers. Okay. Well, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving forward. Yep, this kind of doesn't surprise me. 4 to 5 people say, or 80% say that your enterprises are primarily reactive, which is actually consistent with surveys we've done every year. There's always the 80, 82, 83% range people who say we're reactive, right? So if you now look at this picture of DJ, let's go ahead and the poll. I'm going to stop sharing if you don't mind, right? We've got a small handful of people who responded to it. So when you think of what this poll said, is most people are reactive, and we start thinking about going from reactive to proactive. That's the transformation we talk about, right? We've literally had 2 calls this morning with prospects and customers where they're fundamentally in a completely uncoordinated mode of interaction. The people are relying on 20, 30-year veterans to understand what's going on with the customer base and how to piece information together. And therefore, as a result, what we wind up seeing is a lot of opportunistic or ad hoc activity going on in the aftermarket, right? And that's the fundamental situation where they find themselves in is reactive. Oh, by the way, you layer on this whole notion of resource shortages, retirements, and so on and so forth. It's a very problematic place to be in. And so when you start moving from there to really orchestrated events, to data-driven versus intuition, to predictable versus reactive, and so on and so forth, that's the change we talk about. And that change, believe it or not, is not very easy to kind of make happen. So when we start looking at this situation, so we say, okay, let's start looking at the framework that people have used in the last many years, right? The whole people, process, technology, and tools framework. And what we find out time and time again is that what companies have today just simply doesn't work, and what they need doesn't exist from the combination of all these things, believe it or not, right? Obviously, we as a software vendor are coming at it from the technology point of view, but broadly speaking, we see this gap across the board on this people, process, and tools framework. So my next question to you is, I always like to break up these webinars with polls. What is your kryptonite? In other words, what is the thing that kind of is going to hurt you or worse in this people, process, tech framework? So again, DJ, let's just quickly run this poll in maybe 30 seconds at best, just to see how people respond to it. I just want to understand where people are coming from in terms of their big challenges out here in the transformation journey. Okay, we got a few votes in there, just good. So 3 out of 6, 50% say people. So I'd say actually more, 6 out of 7 are people saying people. So there's a lot of people who are saying that people issues are the kryptonite that they face. DJ, I'm going to stop the sharing if you don't mind, and kind of get to the next aspect of this thing. So when you think about what you guys just voted on, the kryptonite, if you may, the thing that's going to make this process fail or make this transformation fail is people, and we actually agree with that. So when you start thinking about when we started thinking about what makes companies successful and what's not, it's clear that the leader has to be on board, right? So I'm a former management consultant, like some of you are on this call, and we think in 2x2 frameworks, right? And so my framework was, what's the motivation of a leader? Believe it or not, sometimes the motivation is low. And what's the aftermarket maturity, if you may, of the company, of the OEM? And again, low to high in both cases. The easy answers on both extremes are pretty straightforward, right? In low maturity, low motivation, don't even waste your time on it, just keep doing other stuff. High maturity, high motivation, they're clearly the stars are running full bore ahead, things are going. Where we start seeing problems happen is if you have a low maturity aftermarket team or organization with a high motivated leader. There's an issue where you can start making things happen, but you really have to bring your team along. And if you have a low maturity leader and a low motivated leader and a high maturity organization, the change just doesn't happen, right? Because a company is trying to move things along and the motivation is just lacking in the leader to get things happen, maybe because somebody's been there for a long time and they're kind of watching the clock to retirement, or they're ready for the next move, and so on and so forth. And so we started thinking about this aftermarket maturity framework, and really the notion of getting people having the right motivation in place is really important as a precursor almost to the fact of being the maturity framework. So as we start looking at companies, and we've now been fortunate with my own personal experiences and at Entytle, working with over 50 companies in the last 9 years, what we realize is that it's no different from a iterative loop, right? First, you have to understand where you are in your maturity curve. You have to understand where you are in the process of making this change happen. You're going to start investing in transformation, and the transformation could be people, process, technology. You have to do all of the above. And then you start getting the benefits, and then start basically, you repeat and rinse, as you say, right? Or rinse and repeat, as you say. So that's the process, how we think about this change management, if you may. So like everybody else, we've decided to kind of bucket this thing into 4 levels, right? Starting with the basic framework of where you are today, level 1, right? And we measure this on people, process, and technology, people, process, and data and tools, and try to make sure we kind of measure that stuff. And all the way from level 1, which is just somebody walking to a horse-drawn carriage, to a car, to rocket ship or whatever, right? So that's kind of how we think about the framework. And what you're going to see in the next few slides is our thought process and how we think about what one should do in terms of measuring yourself, right? So if you assume that where you are today is a reactive enterprise, and I think we saw 80% of you responded to say that's a reactive enterprise is primarily what defines you. What we see time and time again is you basically have what you call inbound sales or sales, inside sales is really an inbound order taking desk. So you're just taking reactive requests. There's no dedicated aftermarket team, right? This is just something that happens to be part of somebody's job. There is no data framework. It's just ERP looking for online data. Doesn't happen. There's no data warehouse. There's no data platform. It's all ERP related data. Manual codes. I cannot tell you how many PDFs we see these days in the business we're in. And then, you have to make people work for the data and work for insights, and you're constantly relying on tribal knowledge. I know this sounds crazy, but years ago, when I was with a large industrial manufacturer, we literally had a person who was back then 72 years old, and he is still in the business for like 40 years at that time. And the company refused to let him retire because this was just unimaginable to let this guy go away, because with him went a ton of knowledge along with that, right? So we find time and time again, people at this level 1. And quite honestly, what we wind up doing in the situation is we invariably tell people, listen, you have to get the right people in place. You have to get the right process in place before you even think of technology. So it is amazing how often we tell people these days, like, you know what? I don't think you're ready for this technology transformation. I don't think you're ready for really driving a proactive sales engine using technology until you make the people and process change, right? So go make that happen, get a data house in order, and then we can talk, right? And people are actually surprised when you tell that we're not ready to talk to you right now. Maybe we can talk in a year or 2. And that's unfathomable for some people that a vendor like us tells them to maybe get some of these changes done before they come talk to us. So when you get through this process, when you start making this recognition that you're at level 1, you start making the changes, right? So one of the first things I tell people to do is like, hey, there's a whole skill will gap. I recently talked about it in a Forbes article that I wrote, right? The skill will gap is a big deal and it's real, which means either you have people with skill or the people with will, and you need to have both. If you don't have people with will, it's hard to make it happen. But if you have people with will and no skill, you can at least train them. You can at least do something about it. So start really assessing your team, try to see where you are. See if you can put together an outbound sales process and prospecting process. I know this sounds simple. It is really, really hard. We as a technology company, because we start from ground zero, it is prospecting every single day, right? So our teams, JW, our team in India, are used to prospecting all day long. It takes a completely different process, mindset, skill set, whatever, right? To get that in place. And then start thinking what data holes you have. So that's step number 1 as you get to this level of maturity. The second stage of maturity is what we go from walking to a horse-drawn carriage in this framework, right? So create this dedicated team on the inbound side, at least, or inside sales. Just make sure people are there who know how to sell. You may have a reactive sales process, interesting, but start making this move towards a prospecting, proactive sales process. People start paying attention to these numbers, right? You'd be surprised how often people don't track the metrics, don't track the performance of the sales team. We see time and time again that CRMs are implemented primarily for the sales team. On the equipment side, we strongly recommend you start making sure that the aftermarket and service teams have access to this as well. Make sure you can start understanding where registration is happening, where your install base is being created, get that underway, and then at least start some rudimentary assembly of your install base data. We talked to a customer, like I said, the one this morning. They have 4 different systems, I think. They have a legacy service system, they had Salesforce, they have some Bond ERP, and they have some spreadsheets, and they're now trying to assemble for the first time. By the way, this is a $500 million company. They're trying to assemble for the first time a first look at the install base, and at least they have the data sources. They're trying to make it happen, but they've never done this before. So let's get this in place. We find that the people who are beginning to get serious about the change, about the motivation to change and transform, are at least beginning to make these moves, right? Separation and creation of a new team, some management put in place to pay attention to the revenue numbers and metrics, some rudimentary CRM-like activities going on to make sure people are tracking pipelines and so on and so forth, and then really beginning to say, okay, I need to really understand my install base and see what we can do with it. And that's really an important aspect of things as well. When you get through level 2, you start this process going. By the way, I'd say that the timeline between level 1 and level 2 can be anywhere from 6 months to a year. I know that sounds like a really long time, but people processes do take time. Change management does take time. Changing people out does take time. So I would assume that if you're at the standing start, which is level 1, you can plan for 6 months to a year to get to level 2. So when you get to level 2, you have this dedicated team that you have in place. You're now trying to figure out how you can start taking the data you put in level 1, getting the install base data. How are you going to start using it, right? So you may start with simple things like generic digital marketing. Again, in most OEMs, again, I wouldn't say all OEMs, most OEMs, we've been surprised by the relative immaturity of the digital marketing process. What I mean by that is people are just literally beginning to start using things like Pardot or Marketo and other stuff for aftermarket purposes. They use them for equipment sales, but not for the install base, not for aftermarket, not as much as you think you should. People are beginning to start using install base data to start planning the travel. People are using the data to start hunting and so on and so forth. And finally, we start seeing people using analytics, right? And it could be something as simple like, I got an intern, my favorite example. I have an intern doing some spreadsheets for me, or I have the BI team in IT kind of running some reports for me, or I have something along those lines that starts creating some form of a hunting list, which, believe it or not, is almost like a precursor to kind of getting this maturity level up. Look, we all know that every one of you, and some of you on the phone, on the call today, I can see you have huge install bases. So you really have to be able to reduce that surface area, shrink that surface area so it doesn't become unmanageable for your teams. So how do you do that? Create these smart hunting lists. So you start creating digital parts catalog, make sure people are aware that this thing exists in a way that's easy to manage. And then start building a customer 360 view. This sounds like a simple example, but do you really know what an install base looks like? Do you really know what everything your customer has done with you? And what I mean by that, from the time that equipment is shipped and installed at that site, to all the different parts and services that have happened, any warranty activities, any upgrades, modifications, and so on and so forth, because that collective time series of data that you have, not just at each customer, but across every one of your customers, is incredibly valuable. And when you start putting the data together, you're going to start seeing the fundamental data issues that we see time and time again. We see account reconciliation issues where something in a service system is called something different. The CRM is called different, something in ERP. So reconciling all that information, making sure the data is cleansed and deduplicated and enriched is important, and really being able to understand what's out there for me. So one of the calls we had this week, one of our customers saying, Vivek, can you guys help me calculate the entitlement value in your customer, in my customer base? So I'm like, sure we could, but you really need to make sure you do that properly, because that helps you understand where the white spots are, where the opportunities are, and then kind of creates those very specific campaigns and activities and targets, if you may, for your install base, either for salespeople or for your channel partners or whoever it might be. You really need to start doing that to start understanding where the white spots are. And that's really an important aspect of stuff. So you go through level one, acknowledging that you need to get going. You make the transition to level two, 6 months to a year. Once that starts happening, the pace starts quickening. We've seen once people start putting the level two frameworks in place, level two foundations in place, they get to level three reasonably quickly. I'd say no more than 6 months from then, because by then the engine's beginning to go. People are motivated. They start seeing early results from level two, and they start getting that, self-perpetuating flywheel, getting that underway, right? So we start seeing that happen as well. And we see that people take about, like I said, a year to year and a half to get to this point. But getting to this point is really important, because once you get there, you're now in a situation where you're able to get to level four, which is this whole notion of predictive, prescriptive, proactive, really driving targeted campaigns, targeted hunting lists, utilizing every bit of the power of the install base to really drive the business value, start seeing the momentum shift in your favor. And I think this becomes one of those self-fulfilling prophecies, which is, because you start seeing wins, you expect them, so you invest in it, and so on and so forth. So we start seeing that happen. It takes a good 2 years, if you may, like I said, but when we come in as at level two-ish almost, so I'd say from level two to level four is a good year to, I'd say about a good year, because by the time you onboard people with the right data, by the time you onboard people with the right install-based intelligence, train them on selling techniques, get the feedback, fix it, improve, iterate, that process probably takes 6 months to a year at least. So my experience, not just in Entytle, but with my previous experiences in companies in the past, has been that you should expect like a 1 to 2 year journey to get there. And that's almost always what I tell our customers or prospects, saying, look, if you're at level one, you and I really shouldn't talk at least for a year, maybe even a year and a half, depending on how motivated you're to change and how much change management you have to do, right? So that's kind of how we think of the maturity framework. And I know this sounds trite, but it's been proven to be true. Every time we go through this process, we find that when failures do happen, it's somebody who wants to give keys to a Ferrari to a kid who can't drive. You're going to only expect it to be a wreck. And that's what happens. So we've made the mistake, by the way. I've made the mistake of, quote unquote, selling or, quote unquote, letting Entytle be bought by companies who are level one. And it's been an unmitigated disaster. It just doesn't work right. And on the other hand, when we have the right management in place, when we have the right leadership in place and the right tools in place, that process succeeds beautifully. And some of the stuff you'll see in the next page in terms of some of the customers who succeed with us are the ones who made that motivated change in terms of the investment to make it happen. So what I want to do is pause again for a second and take the third survey, right? So DJ, if you don't mind firing up the third survey, where do you think you lie today in this maturity framework, 1 to 4, right? And I'd love to hear very candidly from you guys where you are. I'm going to go on mute for a second while you respond to these questions. Okay, fascinating. 100% at level 2, which is actually is not surprising. When I see some of the names in the attendee list out now, it doesn't surprise me, because many of you have actually started making the changes you need, both in terms of people and process to get there. So I'm going to end the poll, DJ. and kind of stop sharing as well. Actually, yeah, we can share the results here. So, you know, it's remarkable that, 100% of you think you're at level 2, but that's not surprising, seeing the makeup of the people who are on the call today. So really, it's actually interesting. So it's good to see that you started making the change, you're on the journey already, and that's good to see. So with that, I want to move to the last couple of slides in this deck. So, my question was when I started writing this presentation, like, so why does it give me the right to talk about this stuff? And, candidly, I've got to the point in Entitle's journey where we've seen so many successes and so many failures that we really think that it's important to kind of put that out there upfront early on to everybody to understand that this is a journey that takes long. You need to have the investment, both in terms of psychological investment, emotional investment, and dollar investment, right? You have to do that. And I know this sounds trite, but change management is just the reality of this situation here. It's a journey. Don't expect instant gratification. I know we're used to instant gratification in the US, but please don't expect it. It just takes time. I've learned it the hard way. I want to make sure you guys understand that as well. And finally, candidly, I think the reason we put this deck together and we put this session together is we were in the right, and not just in my own professional life prior to Entytle, but just helping a number of large companies through this process into success. And I think you see, look, some of these logos out there, they're not small. Yeah, we're working with multi-billion dollar companies all the way to companies that have maybe a couple $100 million in sales. So we see everything. We see people with maturity and sophistication to not that mature, not that sophisticated, and who people have good process. They have things like the Danaher business system and so on, so Six Sigma, all the way to people who are just kind of making up stuff on the fly, right? We've been through this journey with them, and we recognize what it takes to succeed. And so that's kind of why I want to make sure you understand that we've learned a lot from these leaders out here, and they've made its commitment to succeed and a commitment to transform, and that's what's got them there. So with that brings me to the end of the session, and we timed it at 30 minutes. We got it to almost 30 minutes. I'm excited that I was able to kind of keep it on time. We made the survey available, by the way, on our website and on LinkedIn as well. It's turned out to be a big hit. There's tons of people who want to assess where they are. We're going to put some results out from the from the results we get from people's surveys. We'll be publishing that probably in the next couple of weeks. And we are looking forward to kind of getting your inputs on the survey as well. With that, I appreciate your time today. Thank you very much. And JW, I'm open for questions now.
Perfect, Vivek. Thanks. I have one you'll definitely have some fun with here. What does autonomous aftermarket mean?
Autonomous aftermarkets is a phrase that was knocking on my head for a while. I just couldn't quite figure out how and why to say it. And really, it comes down to the bottom line when we talk about this whole people, process, tools. Look, nirvana to me, the promised land is to me where stuff just happens automatically, right? Data flows in, signals flow in from our customers and install base, be it transactional data, service data, IoT data, whatever it is. Processing happens like it is in the brain, and things just happen, right? That's what I want to describe as a perfect utopia, and that's kind of where I think we can go to. Much as we're trying to get to autonomous vehicles right now, I think there's a place in this world for autonomous aftermarket where you sell an equipment to the customer and stuff just happens, parts get shipped, dispatch just happens, and service technicians or self-healing happens at some point, right? That's kind of how we think about it. And to make that happen, there needs to be a single platform, a single place where all this processing can happen together. IoT data, analog data, transaction data, knowledge, chat GPT, whatever you want to call it, all it comes together. And I think that's the vision that we have. So hopefully that answers the question on autonomous aftermarket.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. And then one more here, which was kind of answered by the poll, since level 2 is the most common maturity level OEM that Entytle comes across. Again, evident in the poll there. What stages should or what should stage 2 companies do to get going if they're struggling?
I think we talked about people and motivation as a first thing. I think that's seriously underestimated. Most of you I see on the call today are experienced managers, but that's a big part of it. Get the right people in place. We've seen failures happen because of wrong people in place. The easiest part, believe it or not, is a process. The next easy part is technology, because technology, compared to where we were when I was a young manager is vastly and dramatically easier and better than it used to be in the past. Look, we're able to implement these systems in 8 weeks versus years that used to take in the past. Don't worry about the technology. So if I were to isolate everything, JW, it'll be the people aspect. Make sure the right team's in place first.
Awesome. Thank you, Vivek. That's
I
all
see
our
a question.
questions for now.
I think I see a question
Oh,
right
we got
now.
another comment.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Did you see the question?
Okay. Yeah, I got it here. From Vivek, another Vivek. How
Yeah.
OEMs interact with sales channels like distribution to capture install base and move forward on the aftermarket maturity curve?
Yeah, Vivek, that's a great question. Is both easy and difficult at the same time, right? And the easy part of it is the fact that it's almost like you need to assess the maturity of the channel, like we suggested for you itself. Right? So that's the easy part. When I say easy part, there's tools and frameworks you can do to kind of go understand the maturity of the aftermarket. What I've seen in the industrial world that I've lived in for the last 30 years, Vivek, is unfortunately many channel partners tend to be mom and pops, onesie, twosie manufacturers reps, and that's a tough place to be in, right? Because most of these guys are used to having a line count of 5, 6, 7 people, 5, 6, 7 principals. They're used to doing certain things, go down their list of prospects they're used to. So making the change happen is hard. I know this sounds difficult, but you may wind up having to change your channel partners at some point. That's point number one. Point number two, when you make that change, that's when the difficult part becomes easy, which is with the right partner, with the right motivation, they will start sharing data with you. So we actually have a number of customers today who have a mixed channel. So they do a bunch of stuff directly, and there's a bunch of stuff indirectly to channels. And where we've seen success is with the mature channel partners who have the right mindset and framework, have invested in some form of data. By the way, when I say some form of data, it could be their own CRM, large or small. They have some ERP system where they keep track of all their transactions. They're able and willing to share their data back with our customer, the OEM. It doesn't happen broadly across the board, but absolutely the top few channel partners will start sharing data, and then we can blend that data with the OEM data, with the partner data, and make it work well for both the OEM and the channel partner. The last thing I would say, Vivek, is that you have to give the right incentive to the channel partner as well, right? Look, they're in to make money just like you are. So instead of using the data as a cudgel, instead of using this platform as a stick, use it as a carrot to get the incentives in the right place to do it. Because if they're motivated to share data with you, they're motivated to win. And that's what I've seen. So we now have 3 or 4 customers who've taken just the top 5 channel partners, by the way, which accounts for like 50% of the business. You don't need to go to the long tail if you mean in the beginning, but go to the top few and start the process. You'd be surprised to see how many people will be willing to kind of start that process with you. But first thing, assess your channel network in terms of maturity before you start worrying about the data part of it. So hopefully that answers the question, Vivek. Okay.
Excellent.
GW, anything else?
Nothing else I'm seeing right now.
Okay. Well, folks, I'm looking forward to getting you to respond to the survey in the previous page. If there's anything else we can do for you, please write to us at info@entytle.com. This is an important topic. This is near and dear to my heart because I just see so much opportunity that gets not captured because of this whole maturity framework issues. So I'd urge you to kind of invest in this for your own companies and your own careers for that matter as well, right? It makes a big difference. With that, I think we'll call it a day. Thank you very much. It's a 34 minutes since you started. Great timing. And again, thanks for your investment in our webinar today. Appreciate it. I'm going to stop sharing right now, JW, and end the call.
Thank you all.
Thank
Look
you.
forward
Bye-bye.
to speaking with you in the future. Cheers.